Welcome to Noah's Narratives, where every story is more than just words. It's an experience that draws you in and keeps you hooked. Today, we're diving into a tale so gripping, you won't want to miss a second, so make sure you stay with me till the end. Before we begin, let's connect. Drop a comment below and tell me, what city and country are you watching from? I'd love to know where my amazing viewers are tuning in from around the world. And if you're a fan of stories that captivate and inspire, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves a great story, and subscribe to the channel so you're always the first to catch the next adventure. Now, let's get into it. The night was quiet, save for the hum of tires slicing through the wet asphalt. The sky was thick with low-hanging clouds, and a fine mist clung to the road, making it glisten like glass. General Donovan Reed, a decorated and youthful-looking 50-year-old U.S. Army general, sped down a suburban highway in his sleek black sedan, the engine purring beneath him as he pushed the accelerator harder. Every second was precious. His daughter, Clara, had just been rushed to the hospital after an unexpected and severe asthmatic attack. The text from her nanny was frantic. Clara's condition worsened. She's struggling to breathe. They're taking her to the ER. Hurry. His heart thudded in his chest, urgency flooding his mind. The young girl he loved more than anything in the world was fighting for her life, and all he could think about was getting to her in time. As the speedometer climbed, Reed's thoughts raced along with the car. Come on, Clara. Hang in there. Daddy's coming. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. If you were in his shoes, wouldn't you drive the same or even faster? But just as the world outside seemed to blur, red and blue lights suddenly flared in his rearview mirror. The harsh wail of a siren sliced through the tense silence. He glanced up. A police cruiser had pulled behind him, flashing its lights and blaring its siren. The shrill sound cut through the night, demanding his attention. His heart sank, knowing that every moment lost was a risk to Clara's life. Reluctantly, he eased his car onto the shoulder and slowed to a stop, his mind already focused on getting back on the road as quickly as possible. He took a deep breath, reminded himself to remain calm, and prepared his military ID and driver's license. He would need them to smooth things over quickly. The officer approached his vehicle with an air of authority, his heavy boots crunching against the wet pavement. Flashlight in hand, Officer Bradley Moore had the look of a man who believed his presence commanded immediate respect. His expression was hard, his demeanor unfriendly. A thick set of muscles strained against his uniform, but it wasn't his size that unsettled Reed. It was a subtle undercurrent of disdain in his eyes, something colder, something more dangerous. Moore leaned down, peering into the car. Do you know how fast you were going, boy? His tone was laced with condescension, a casual insult veiled beneath the question. Reed blinked, momentarily taken aback by the word boy. That's condescending, right? If you're watching this, what do you think about that boy? He straightened his posture, pulling his uniform jacket tighter to reveal the medals and ribbons gleaming on his chest. His voice was steady, despite the sudden flare of anger in his chest. Officer, I apologize. My daughter's in the hospital. She's having a life-threatening asthma attack. I was rushing to get to her. Moore's eyes narrowed, but he showed no sign of empathy. Instead, he gestured for the documents. License and registration. Can you imagine? What would you have done if you were in the same situation as Reed? Reed handed them over without hesitation, his military ID included. Moore glanced at it briefly, his lip curling into a sneer, but offered no acknowledgement. Instead, he shifted his stance, the disdain now clearly evident in his voice. Military, huh? That doesn't put you above the law. People like you think you're untouchable. Reed's jaw tightened. He had dealt with bias before, on the battlefield, in boardrooms, even among his own ranks. But nothing stung more than hearing it now, at a moment when his daughter's life hung in the balance. He kept his voice even. Officer, I'm not asking for leniency. I'm asking for understanding. My daughter, Before Reed could finish his sentence, Moore's patience snapped. He shoved a flashlight into Reed's chest, the metallic beam cold against his skin. "Shut up and step out of the car." Reed didn't flinch. Isn't that commendable? Years of military training had taught him the importance of staying calm, of not escalating things. He exited the vehicle slowly, hands raised to show he posed no threat. The rain began to fall harder now, soaking through his jacket as the tension thickened in the air. But Moore, seemingly bent on confrontation, stepped forward with a menacing posture, his eyes burning with contempt. "Look, I'm not here for a fight, officer," Reed said, his voice low but firm. "Please just—" Before he could finish, Moore's fist shot out like a lightning strike, connecting squarely with Reed's face. The impact sent him staggering backward, his head snapping to the side as blood began to trickle from his split lip. The cold sting of rain mingled with the heat of pain, but Reed didn't move to retaliate. He didn't raise a hand to fight back. Instead, he wiped the blood from his lip and stood tall. His eyes never left Moore's. His calm demeanor in the face of such aggression was unnerving. Should we say Reed was too calm, or he was just a man who has his emotions under control, despite the fact that he's under pressure to save his daughter? If you were faced with the same circumstance, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Let's move on with this fascinating story while I await your response in the comment section. "Officer Moore," Reed said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You've just assaulted a senior U.S. Army general. There are witnesses, and your body cam is recording." For a long moment, Moore stood frozen, the shock of his own actions sinking in. He could feel the weight of what he had just done, but there was no taking it back now. The fear of getting caught, of facing the consequences, finally gripped him, his bravado cracking. Reed turned on his heel and made his way back to his car. With a calmness that seemed unnatural given the circumstances, he dialed 911. "This is General Donovan Reed. I need backup and medical assistance immediately. I've been assaulted by an officer on duty." Within minutes, additional officers arrived, including a supervising sergeant who, upon recognizing Reed, immediately realized the gravity of the situation. Moore, now realizing the mess he had created, had nowhere to hide. As the flashing lights of the police vehicles receded into the night, General Donovan Reed refocused his energy. His lip throbbed from the punch, and the metallic taste of blood lingered. But he ignored the discomfort. His mind was consumed with one thought: his daughter Clara. Without wasting another second, he slipped back into his car and resumed his drive, though this time at a pace that wouldn't risk another police encounter. The hospital came into view, its towering structure illuminated against the dark sky. Reed exhaled sharply, parking near the emergency entrance. The moment he stepped out of the car, his military uniform caught the eye of a passing nurse who immediately approached him. "General Reed," she asked, her tone tinged with urgency and respect. "Your daughter is in the pediatric ICU. Please come with me." Reed nodded, his usual calm composure masking the storm of emotions churning inside him. The nurse led him swiftly through the brightly lit hallways. As they moved, doctors and other staff glanced at him with recognition and deference. His youthful appearance, juxtaposed with the numerous medals on his uniform, gave him an air of command that made people take notice. When they reached the pediatric ICU, a doctor greeted him, her expression both professional and empathetic. "General Reed, your daughter is stable for now. The oxygen therapy is helping her breathe more easily, but we'll need to monitor her closely through the night." Reed nodded, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "Thank you, doctor. Can I see her?" "Of course." As he stepped into Clara's room, his breath caught. His usually vibrant and talkative 7-year-old lay still, her small chest rising and falling with the aid of an oxygen mask. Can you imagine how sad this is? Her curly hair was slightly disheveled, and her favorite stuffed bunny was tucked under her arm. Reed approached her bedside, his military demeanor melting away as he gently placed a hand on her tiny fingers. "Hey!" "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice soft and filled with love. "Daddy's here." Clara stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open. A faint smile spread across her face beneath the oxygen mask. "Daddy," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, baby. You're going to be okay," he assured her, his heart aching to see her so vulnerable. He pulled up a chair and sat by her side, never letting go of her hand. Meanwhile, outside in the parking lot, Officer Bradley Moore sat in his cruiser, wrestling with a gnawing feeling in his gut. Reed's calm, unwavering demeanor during their encounter had left him unsettled. Part of him still didn't believe the man's story. What if it had been an excuse to evade the consequences of speeding? What if it was a clever ploy? Unable to shake the doubt, Moore decided to follow Reed into the hospital, still in his uniform and carrying his badge. He made his way to the reception desk, where the staff greeted him with a mix of professionalism and suspicion. "I'm here to check on a situation involving a General Reed," Moore said gruffly. "I need to confirm something." The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, frowned slightly. "General Reed is here to see his daughter, who is in critical condition. May I ask why you're investigating this?" "It's standard procedure," Moore lied, avoiding her gaze. The receptionist hesitated, but ultimately directed him toward the pediatric ICU. As Moore approached, he saw Reed through the glass window of Clara's room. The general's uniform seemed almost too pristine for a moment so personal, but his posture had softened. Moore watched as Reed sat beside his daughter, holding her hand and whispering words of comfort. It was a tender scene that struck a nerve. For the first time that evening, Moore felt the full weight of what he had done. His fist clenched as he replayed the confrontation in his mind. How he had dismissed Reed's plea, escalated the situation unnecessarily, and even resorted to violence. Now, seeing Reed's genuine concern for his child, Moore realized he had made a grave error. A nurse passing by noticed Moore lingering and gave him a disapproving glance. "Is there something you need?"
Moore hesitated before shaking his head. "No, just observing," he muttered. As he turned to leave, a sense of shame settled over him. For the first time in years, Bradley Moore began to question not just his actions that night, but the biases and anger that had driven them. General Reed isn't the type who takes disrespect lightly. He didn't leave it at that. He took the case to court to make the racist officer an example to others. The court case was unlike anything the nation had seen in years. It became a sensation, a rallying cry for justice, not just for Reed, but for anyone who had been unfairly treated by the hands of power. General Reed stood firm, not as a victim, but as a symbol of integrity. His lawyers presented a rock-solid case. Body cam footage that showed Moore's actions without a shadow of doubt. Eyewitness accounts of the entire altercation, and a history of complaints about Moore's behavior. Racist remarks, excessive force, and misconduct. The courtroom was tense, the eyes of the nation trained on this single moment. Reed's composure was unmatched. He didn't let his emotions spill out. He didn't need to. His presence alone, dignified and powerful, spoke volumes. General Reed entered the courtroom with the same quiet dignity he had displayed on the night of the incident. He was flanked by his legal team, but his presence alone was commanding. Though youthful in appearance, his uniform spoke volumes about his years of service and discipline. The room hushed as he took the stand, his gaze steady but free of malice. The trial had captivated the nation. Body cam footage, witness testimonies, and Moore's checkered history were laid bare. The video of the incident played on a large screen. Reed, calm and composed, explaining his daughter's emergency, only to be punched in the face by a man wearing a badge. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the footage paused on the aftermath. Reed, bleeding but still standing tall, refusing to retaliate. The prosecutor didn't hold back. This case is not just about one officer's misconduct. It's about the systemic abuse of power and the unchecked biases that plague our society. General Reed represents the restraint we should all strive for, while Officer Moore represents what we must root out. Moore's defense tried to argue stress and a misunderstanding of the situation, but it was clear they were grasping at straws. When Reed was called to testify, he delivered his account with the precision of a seasoned leader. His voice was calm, deliberate, and unshaken. "I am not here for revenge," Reed said, his voice carrying across the room. "I am here because no one, regardless of rank, race, or circumstance, should face such unwarranted violence. I'm here because my daughter deserves to grow up in a world where integrity outweighs prejudice." The verdict came swiftly. Officer Moore was found guilty of assault, abuse of power, and racial discrimination. The judge's tone was stern as she read the sentence. Moore was to be suspended indefinitely, stripped of his badge, and required to attend sensitivity and de-escalation training. But that wasn't all. The judge also ordered Moore to issue a public apology, a rare but significant ruling intended to make him confront the consequences of his actions. A week later, a podium was set up outside the police department. Cameras flashed as Officer Moore, now dressed in plain clothes, stepped forward. His posture was hunched, his face etched with discomfort. Standing beside him was General Reed, his expression neutral but unyielding. Moore cleared his throat, his voice cracking as he began. "I want to publicly apologize to General Reed and his family for my actions. I allowed my biases to cloud my judgment and acted in a way that dishonored my badge and the trust placed in me as a police officer." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others skeptical. Moore's hands trembled as he continued. "What I did was wrong, and I accept the consequences. I will use this experience to better myself and to educate others about the dangers of prejudice and abuse of power." When Moore stepped away, it was Reed's turn to speak. The cameras shifted to him, capturing every word. "Accountability is not a punishment. It is an opportunity to grow," Reed said. "I hope this serves as a reminder that justice can prevail when we approach conflict with integrity. Officer Moore has taken a step in the right direction, and I encourage others to do the same." The case left a lasting impact. Moore's public apology became a viral moment, sparking nationwide discussions about race, law enforcement, and accountability. Meanwhile, General Reed's actions were celebrated as a masterclass in leadership and restraint. He was invited to speak at universities and police academies, sharing his story and advocating for reform. But for Reed, the greatest victory wasn't the courtroom win or the public acclaim. It was the quiet moment he shared with his daughter that night after the trial. As he tucked Clara into bed, her tiny hand clutching his, she looked up at him and smiled. "Did you win, Daddy?" she asked, her voice still faint from her recovery. Reed nodded, his heart swelling. "Yes, sweetheart, we all did. Are you getting emotional? Me too. What do you think about this story so far? Share your thoughts with me in the comments section." In a nutshell, the verdict was swift and final. Officer Moore was found guilty of assault, racial discrimination, and abuse of power. His badge was stripped from him, his gun taken away. He was sentenced to community service and ordered to attend racial sensitivity training. But Reed wasn't finished. He wasn't seeking just personal justice. He wanted change. Months later, Reed, never one to seek vengeance, invited Moore to a public forum he organized to discuss race, relations, and law enforcement. The room was full of skeptical eyes, many of them not expecting Moore to show up. But he did, his humiliation still fresh. Moore agreed to participate, though it was clear he was uncomfortable, ashamed even. Standing on the stage with Moore beside him, Reed looked out over the crowd. "You wronged me, Officer Moore," he began, his voice unwavering. "But anger won't fix what's broken in this country. Education will. Accountability will. What happened between us is a result of a deeper problem. It's a problem that won't go away if we ignore it. I hope that in this moment, Officer Moore will begin to understand the weight of his actions." Moore shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders hunched in a way that conveyed regret. His voice was shaky as he spoke. "General Reed, I was wrong. About you, about everything. I can't undo what I did, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better." The words hung in the air, a painful public acknowledgement of his failures. It wasn't easy for Moore to swallow his pride, but in the presence of Reed's steady gaze, He had no choice but to face his own shame. As the crowd watched in silence, Reed spoke once more, his tone unyielding yet hopeful. This is not the end of Officer Moore's journey. This is the beginning. Change starts with the hard conversations, with acknowledging mistakes, and with doing the work to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself. The road to redemption was long, but Moore took the first step. Together, Reed and Moore would work to create a better future, one where justice was not just about punishment, but about understanding. And Reed, the general who had faced down a punch without striking back, had won the most important battle of all, teaching the power of accountability, education, and the quiet fury of a father's love. Months had passed since the courtroom, drama and the public apology that had sent shockwaves across the nation. General Donovan Reed had moved forward, focusing on his duties, his family, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had handled the incident with the grace and integrity it demanded. Yet one evening, as he sat in his study reviewing military documents, a hesitant knock came at his front door. Reed opened the door to find Officer Bradley Moore standing on the porch. He wasn't in uniform, his badge and gun long surrendered. Instead, he stood there in casual clothes, clutching a small notebook in one hand. His once defiant demeanor had softened, replaced by what looked like genuine remorse. "General Reed," Moore began, his voice unsure but earnest. "I know I have no right to show up here unannounced, but I felt I needed to speak with you personally." Reed's instinctive wariness flickered for a moment. Then, with the same calm resolve that had carried him through the incident, he stepped aside and gestured for Moore to come in. They sat in Reed's living room, the contrast between them stark. Moore's posture was slouched, his eyes flickering between guilt and determination. Reed, ever composed, watched him with a gaze that invited honesty but allowed no space for pretense. "I've spent the last few months reflecting," Moore said finally, breaking the silence. "The trial, the suspension, everything, it's been humbling. I didn't just lose my badge. I realized how much damage I've done, not just to you, but to the people I was supposed to protect." Reed said nothing, letting the man continue. "I grew up in a world that taught me to see people like you through a certain lens," Moore admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. You showed me that strength isn't about fists or authority. It's about integrity, restraint, and courage. And now I want to do better. I want to help others like me see what I couldn't." Reed leaned back, crossing his arms. "What are you suggesting, Officer Moore?" "Not officer," Moore corrected. "Just Bradley. And I'm suggesting that we work together. I want to help you educate officers, especially the ones like me, about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of accountability. I don't know if I can fix everything I've done, but maybe I can stop others from making the same mistakes." Reed regarded him carefully, searching for any trace of insincerity. What he saw instead was a man stripped of pride, willing to rebuild himself from the ground up. Slowly, Reed nodded. Their partnership began quietly. Reed invited Moore to his next speaking engagement at a police academy, where the former officer shared his story alongside the general. The cadets were riveted as Moore recounted his actions, his shame, and the lessons he had learned. "I thought my badge gave me power," Moore confessed to the audience. "But it's not about power. It's about trust. And I betrayed that trust. If you walk away with anything today, let it be this: your bias, unchecked, can destroy lives, yours included." Reed followed with his own message, his voice steady and commanding. "Change doesn't happen overnight, nor does it come from one man. But it begins with accountability. It begins with humility, and it begins when we choose to see each other as human first." Over time, their work expanded. Together, they launched a program called the Integrity Initiative, aimed at providing training sessions for law enforcement officers nationwide. The program focused on implicit bias, de-escalation tactics, and fostering genuine connections with the communities they served. Moore's perspective as a reformed officer added a layer of authenticity that resonated deeply with participants. The partnership wasn't without its challenges. Moore faced criticism from former colleagues, who accused him of betraying the force. while Reed dealt with skeptics, questioning why he would work with the man who had assaulted him. But both men understood the value of their mission. "I'm not doing this to absolve him," Reed explained during a televised interview. "I'm doing this because change requires uncomfortable conversations and unlikely alliances. Bradley Moore is proof that even those who've erred can become part of the solution." Years later, their efforts bore fruit. Departments across the country adopted the Integrity Initiative, and Moore became a sought-after speaker. His once tarnished reputation transformed into a story of redemption. Reed, ever the steady leader, continued to inspire as both a general and a reform advocate. One day, after a particularly impactful session, Moore turned to Reed as they packed up their materials. "General, I'll never be able to thank you enough for giving me this chance." Reed looked at him, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Don't thank me, Bradley. Just keep proving that people can change." And they did. Together, they showed that even in the face of prejudice and conflict, there's always a path toward understanding and redemption if you're willing to take it. And so, as the echoes of this story fade, we are reminded once more of the resilience, the struggle, and the unyielding spirit of those who came before us. Their voices, their pain, their triumphs, it's all a part of the amazing stories we continue to weave together. Here, on this channel, we bring these stories to life, not just to remember, but to spark change, to foster understanding, and to create a future where justice isn't just a dream, but a reality. If these stories resonate with you, if they ignite something within, then I invite you to take a step further. Subscribe to this channel, join our community of listeners, learners and changemakers. Together, we can amplify voices that need to be heard and shed light on truths that must never be forgotten. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, stay connected, and remember to subscribe to the channel.